webinar, 5 key education areas to reduce ALM upgrade costs. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is being brought to you by HP Software. Next slide. And I am your host. My name is Mark Herbert. I'm a member of the Vivid Board of Directors. I'm the nominations chair this year. I'm also one of the Vivid chapter leaders in Arizona and the HP Software Education Special Interest Group leader for Vivid as well. Next slide, please. And we have the great fortune today, folks, to have some of the top experts with us. In the webinar today, we have Lydia Casillas. She's the Vice President of HP Software Solutions for Sky IT Group. Lydia has over 15 years of experience in the HP Software Solutions going back to the Mercury Interactive days. So we're looking forward to getting good knowledge and insight from her on this webinar. Also with us is Susan Merriman. She is the Director of Strategy and Innovation for HP Software Education. And joining her also from HP is Tina Sturgis. She's the Senior Worldwide Marketing Manager for HP Software Education. So it's going to be great to have these ladies with us today. And we're going to learn a lot about how to get our ALM upgrades happening with reduced costs and leveraging education as part of that process. Next slide. So just a few things to mention, folks, a few housekeeping items here. First of all, today's session is intended for all Vivid members. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivid website and visible for all members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording materials will be made available to you, the attendees. We will send a link with the email once they're posted to the Vivid website, so you'll be able to review them later after the fact as well. As we go along throughout the session today, you will be able to ask questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end. There's a questions frame in the toolbar there. And in fact, if you go to the next slide, you'll see a picture for those that are new to this. Yeah, you'll be able to enter your questions there in the middle frame and have those submitted. And then throughout the webinar, we'll be gathering those and addressing as many of those as possible in the time we have today, and answering any that we cannot address immediately offline after the fact when we post them up to the website when the webinar is over. So I'm very excited to have these folks with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this right over to Tina, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you, Mark. So again, go ahead and you can advance the slide there. Your expert panelists, you already know, I'm Tina Sturgis. I did want to introduce Lydia a little bit from where she comes from. She's one of our HP's great partners, Sky IT Group. If you can go ahead and advance to Sky IT. So you can see that they have, been established since 1997. They've won lots of awards with HP. They're actually a very great partner for us. So I want to go ahead. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be facilitating today's panel discussion about the 5 key areas of education to help make your ALM upgrade successful. We all know that upgrading is needed, but sometimes we might put it off because it takes time, money, and resources. Our discussion today isn't really going to be about the steps to physically upgrade your ALM solution. What we're going to do is we're going to focus in and really talk today about educating your end users and admins and when that should happen through the ALM upgrade project. So within the education and IT industry, we know a lot of statistics from research and analysts. For instance, we know that 80% of IT managers recognize that education is critical to the success of their project. We know that the #1 cause of failed implementation is lack of user adoption. We know that there are higher support costs and greater risk in a project where training hasn't been paid attention to. We know that the #1 factor impacting the success of implementation is user adoption. And we know that there is unfortunately a high amount of unused or underutilized software, and one of the causes of that is a lack of user enablement. This brings me to our 5 key areas of education for your ALM upgrade. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here for a second and pass it over to our HP software education expert, Susan Merriman, to kind of take you through the high-level version of the 5 key education areas. Susan?
Thanks, Tina. And hello, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today. Yes, these are the 5 areas. We're going to pause on each one of these today and talk about them and give you some hints and tricks and just some advice on how focusing on each one of these areas and putting a plan in place that may be a simple plan, maybe a bit more complex, around addressing each of these areas can help to reduce your overall upgrade costs and the churn that typically you have a little trepidation around when you consider an upgrade. So we're going to talk about pre-upgrade training, what you need to do in advance, what you're going to do around the time of go live, what needs to be in place post-upgrade, and then net new training post-upgrade and ongoing continuous education. And those last 2 may be ones that you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about. You may not even know the difference between those 2 areas, but we're going to make sure that you leave here today with an understanding of why those are important to address and some simple ways for you to address those and start putting a plan into place. What I also wanted to do, Tina and Lydia, is just step back for a moment from these very focused areas that we're going to spend time looking on, and talk about 5 other areas that I think fit very well into talking about this. So as an education professional, I spend a lot of time looking at what's happening in the industry and what we're doing to better address enablement needs. And as everyone knows, the world is shifting around us and the way that people learn is shifting around us. And a lot of research and emphasis is being put into place right now at making sure that we're helping people learn when they want to learn. And when people want to learn is when they need to learn. So we talk about learning need and the moments of learning need. And I was reading about this in some research that I was looking at, and it just caught my eye that there's 5 moments of learning need that fit very well with these 5 key education areas that we are planning to address today. So I wanted to take just a minute to go through those. And many of them you'll think about. I mean, we all think about a moment of learning need, and that's the first one that you think about is when is something new? So when people are learning how to do something for the first time. But then you think about more, when people are expanding the breadth and depth of what they've learned. And that's very important from a software application, right? When you're doing an upgrade, there are going to be new features and functions. Just because people can get through their job doesn't mean that they're taking advantage of all the ways that they could be doing their job better with the new features and the new capabilities of the upgraded software. Those are kind of your traditional areas of moments of learning need that we've addressed well. Then we move on to the one that is really critical, and that's the moment of apply. So when people need to act on what they've learned, which includes, planning what they'll be doing, remembering what they may have forgotten, or adapting what they've learned to a unique situation. So changing their performance based on the situation in front of them. And then moving even further into the cycle, at the moment of learning need that is very critical, especially again when we're talking about software applications, is the moment of solve. So when problems arise, when things break, when things don't work the way that they were intended to work, when we're faced with a unique situation, we need to be able to access performance support material to help us apply learning right at that moment. And then finally, the moment of need that comes when things change. So when people need to learn a new way of doing something that requires them to change their skills, and that can be because they're filling in for someone else in a different job, or because they new features have rolled out post-upgrade even in a minor release that's come out. So I just wanted to share that to kind of broaden the view of how everyone's thinking as we get into these specific areas around ALM education. So back to you, Tina.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So let's go into our first step around education, which is our pre-upgrade planning training. So what we're going to do to keep you guys, energized and excited is we're going to do in each step or each phase here, we're going to go through and we're actually going to set out a polling question to kind of keep you involved in the conversation. Obviously, feel free to go out and ask some questions. We can take some questions live as we're going, since we're doing it in a panel discussion forum. So feel free as you go through. I'll be watching the questions. So go ahead and let's put up our polling questions for the pre-upgrade planning piece. Are you planning on upgrading your ALM application, and if so, when? Why don't you go ahead and mark that here, and we will kind of take a bit of a couple minutes, a couple seconds here to get some results. So Susan, I'm going to start with you, our HP education expert. What do you think about this pre-planning upgrade step to education?
Yeah, I think this is critical, and the timing around this is critical as well. So this needs to happen as soon as you're thinking about an upgrade and can actually help decide when you're going to do your upgrade. So this is a great time to do a skills assessment or a needs assessment and thinking about who's going to need what kind of training and what level are they at now compared to where you need them to be. So if you have a very well-skilled, up-to-date, on-the-ball group of people who are working with 11.5 and you're getting ready to upgrade to 12, that's very different from an organization who may have had a massive change in workforce turnover lately and are even not fully utilizing 11.5 in the ways that they could be. So doing that assessment of what does your audience look like and where are they today, but then also looking at what is the degree of difference. So what are the new features that you're going to be implementing? And there are ways that training can help with that. So looking at some of our overviews to see what are those big differences and what is the extent of knowledge transfer that's going to be needed in order to have my people be proficient. This is also a time when you can use training to help you understand how to best configure the system. So, again, as Tina mentioned, we're not going to be going into the technical steps around your upgrade today, but you're going to want to understand how you want to utilize the new functions that are available within ALM 12 and before you start to think about configuring so that you can be a good partner to your consultants that you're working with, or if you're doing it internally, you need to have that knowledge especially. This is a great time to start understanding how you're going to be doing your configuration and also to think about your administration team training. And there are many different types of training that we recommend at this time, really, covering the spectrum here, e-learning, ILT, web-based, and we have options in all of those areas that can help with that. But before I go into any, detail around those, I wanted to ask Lydia, what do you think about this area and what advice would you give to people who are just in this planning stage?
Sure. Thanks, Susan. The upgrade is going to take some time, and that's all going to really depend on the number of ALM projects a customer has, the size of those projects, number of users, and the actual customization that's built in earlier releases. And, this is going to take, it could take as little as a few weeks for a customer or a few months, depending on all these variables. So I strongly suggest that a very well thought out upgrade plan is put into motion when upgrading to ALM version 12. But it's not only the environment, it's also how these users are going to adopt to this new version. And as you mentioned, Susan, when you focus in on administration, you've got your site administrators and you've also got your project administrators in version 12 of ALM. And both of those responsibilities should also attend some type of refresher because they're going to be the backbone of all those users that are coming into ALM version, the next major version release new. So there's a ton of different administration tactics and topics that will need to be addressed in an upgrade. And so, as you mentioned, the type of classes, there's the site administration training or even some Delta training to help kind of fill in the gaps from the previous version to version 12. And I think it's imperative that customers understand these changes and differences every step of the way and throughout the entire upgrade process. Because I've seen way too many upgrades gone wrong from poor planning and not training properly. So that's just my little bit of advice there.
Absolutely. This is slightly off the subject of training, but when we're talking about this time period, communication is critical here as well. We all know that an upgrade is going to involve some management of change, and this is a time to start talking with your users and with your administrators about what this change is going to entail, and specifically to focus on two things here. One is what is the benefit for them, so the old what's in it for me, how is this going to improve their daily lives, and rather than just focusing on what it's going to do for the organization. We all get up in the morning wanting to do great things for our organization, but there's a little piece of all of us that cares about ourselves most of all, and focusing on that little piece can help get people more energized and excited for what's to come. And then the other area that at this point in time, even for someone who's not going to go through training for quite some time, it's good to give them a glimpse of the look and feel. Application user interfaces are becoming so much more modern and changing very rapidly, and people want to know, how big of a difference is this going to be? Are the screens going to be attractive for me to work with? Is it going to be easy to navigate? And so by having some simulations available for people to just flip through if they're interested in doing so, you can really start at this point in time in setting a very positive atmosphere for the upgrade.
That's great, Susan and Lydia. Thank you so much. I actually do have the results of our poll on this one. I think it's actually pretty interesting. Let me see if we can get that up on the screen for you. There you go. So again, talking about the actual physical time frame that you should do this sort of pre-upgrade planning. So you can see that the majority of our respondents are about at 1 to 3 months, but very closely behind is this 3 to 6 months. What are your thoughts, Lydia, about that? Is that the trend that you're seeing within the customers that you're doing the ALM upgrades for?
Yeah, actually, you know what, it is a little surprising. The 1 to 3 months is actually a little higher. The ALM version 12 has been out since March of this year, so there's been, quite a bit of time. But you know what, one of the interesting things that I see, depending on the size of the organization, the larger organizations that have had ALM in production for a very long time with a number of users, they tend to typically take a little bit longer to think about and plan for that upgrade process, plus to roll it out. But the smaller organizations that have, less users, less number of projects, I tend to see them kind of jump on the latest and greatest as quickly as possible. So it is interesting that the 1 to 3 months, I'm guessing because we're getting close to the end of the year, is the highest amount. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're going to close out our pre-upgrade planning step to education here at this time. We're going to move on to our go live or just-in-time training. Again, just to make sure you guys all had your coffee and enough caffeine for today, I want to initiate another poll for you. This one is, when do you typically host your quote-unquote go-live training? And there are a few different aspects. So a few weeks prior, at the same time as go-live, or post-upgrade, we don't do go-live training. So go ahead and answer those questions. We'll give you a few minutes here. What we're going to do is I'm going to pass it again. I'm going to actually start with Lydia this time on this one. So Lydia, why don't you give us some insights about the Go Live training for education?
Yeah, Susan talked a little bit earlier about the initial skills assessment. You know, this is something that it is the right time to actually think about when that training is at the best time seated into the organization. So, you know, for the most part, you got to also look at, you know, besides the time frame, also looking at the retention aspect of things. If you tend to schedule this training, you know, months in advance before you actually go live, a lot of times that gap from the time the training is executed and the time the application is available to the users, you know, the retention level could be minimal to none, unfortunately. But, you know, I usually recommend customers that at least, you know, have some sort of parallel type training. So as the back-end team, the operations team is actually working on the upgrade, the users are actually getting training at the same time. Or possibly maybe there's a 1 or 2 week span gap in between there. But so that there is also, once the switch is flipped, the users are not only able to, you know, start working into the new version, but they're also able to be productive because they have some sense and understanding of what details have been new or revision into that major release. That would be my recommendation, Tina.
Excellent.
Right around the
Susan. So Susan, I have a question for you related to Go Live or just-in-time training. And of course, I have a peek into the poll, so that's kind of where it's coming from. But what type of training do you see that, you know, gives our customers the biggest bang for their buck around just-in-time, especially when you're talking about the upgrade of ALM, right? So, you know, most people know ALM really well. They know the 11.5 version. They want to know what's different in 12. What are your recommendations there, Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. And this, again, you know, gets back to understanding your staff and what they need. So we want to make sure that you're not overloading them with information, that you're not trying to feed them everything possible that they could learn. The idea here is that you want to understand what's important to them, what's relevant to them, and provide them enough information so that they feel confident and ready for Go Live, and that they know where they can access resources to use on the job. And we're going to talk about that more in the next couple of sections. But the idea is not to load everything into everyone's brain up front before Go Live. We know that you know, only 80% of budget is typically spent on formal classroom training, but that 80% of learning is actually occurring on the job. And so we need to make a shift in how we are focusing our efforts, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of bullets here. But to your point, what that means and how we deliver this training is there's not one, you know, specific answer that works well for everyone, but some things that we know work are small sections of training. So whether that's giving someone a 30-minute online training to take, whether it's giving them the ability to come into a classroom setting for an hour with an instructor who's going to walk them through a lab so that they have the ability to ask questions while they're doing their hands-on. There's a mix of different ways that it could be delivered, but the key factor is that for some of your people who are very involved and need to know everything, you know, we have courses that are 4 days long that touch on all the topics, and those are critical. They're very important to your success for the right people. But looking at your users who are just focused on a particular area, don't overwhelm them with that. Give them a very targeted session depending on their preference. Give them the choice, an online option, a classroom option, a simulation that they can access, and that's going to be what makes them most successful. And to kind of just close out this section, one of the statistics that I think, you know, is shocking to a lot of people, that IDC did some research on is that, just how important the team skill is to project success. So if you can, improve the team skill by, a 10% change in the overall skill of the team, you can move your project success rate from 30% to 70%. So this is where, investing an incremental amount here in making sure that people are ready before you flip the switch makes all the difference in the success of the ALM upgrade.
That's great. So I'm going to, again, I think that our attendees today will get some value on seeing how, their counterparts in other organizations are actually doing just-in-time training. So go ahead and launch our results from the poll. And we're pretty split here. Again, I sort of find that interesting. I find that, we're about, literally almost 50-50 between a few weeks prior to go live, and essentially we don't do go live training. We just have our people have at it and likely use the software as they've been using it up to date. Typically with ALM, they haven't, there's not a significant amount of change. So Lydia, what are your thoughts about our polling results here?
Well, just as we kind of talked about earlier in this section, obviously a few weeks prior helped to get folks, up and running and in, up to date with the most recent changes. But the interesting one is the post-upgrade results, and we don't do or go live training. That piques my interest only because I've just seen, especially with newer organizations to ALM, when they look at an upgrade, they're just thinking, okay, a couple things change, maybe new features were added. The users have been working on the tool for a year plus. They should be able to pick it up quickly. But I'll be the first to say, if you haven't had a chance to look at version 12, there's quite a few differences in version 12, specifically around some of the new web client stuff and also kind of changing the roles that play into version 12. So, I'd almost suggest kind of thinking about that post-upgrade training or the fact that some organizations don't do it to possibly consider in their upgrade plans a little bit more deeper dive.
Yeah, good point, especially about the web-based versions of some of the clients that they've done with ALM 12. So that's a great point. Let's move on to our post-upgrade key to education. I think I started with Lydia, so I'm going to go and we're going to start with Susan on this. But before we do that, let's go ahead and launch our third polling here. Does your organization typically offer post-upgrade training? So based on my results before, I suspect that at least 47% of you are going to say you do post-upgrade training. But again, I'm going to give you a couple seconds here to finish out your answers. And Susan, why don't we just jump right in and start as we close out our poll?
Well, I'm glad you picked me first because this one is, where I start to get very passionate about where the small things that we do can make a huge difference for our users. What I was talking about when we kicked off today, learning at the moment of need, that's really getting to this point. It's critical to do the early training when you're planning. It's critical to do the pre-go live or just in time. But this post-upgrade training is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where people who have been kind of, oh, yeah, I'll get to that when I get to that. This is when you get to that. And this is where they're going to wake up and realize, wow, I really need to learn. And so let's not penalize them for maybe have been drifting during the pre-go live training. Let's help them be successful now that they're using the application. And so we can really help them by making very small, short trainings available, whether that's as a refresher like we have here on the screen or whether it really is the first time that they're attempting to learn how to use it. We can help them to find success by having those readily available to them. One of our customers who recently went through an upgrade put their full focus on this, with really looking at this as performance support, so that when people were starting to use the application, they had easy access to task-based simulations. And what they found was that they were able to really bring 7,000 people up onto a new version of the application in a 24-hour period, with less than 200 calls coming into the help desk and less than a third of those being training related. So they weren't trying to do a lot in advance, but they had this grand plan around how people at the time of need would be able to access these small, short trainings that they needed, and that would make them successful. And what they found was that it raised their adoption rate from what they typically experience of around 40% up to 95% adoption of the new version of the application. And of course, that increased their performance, their constituent satisfaction, and the outcomes that they were trying to drive. And the reason that they did that is because they were smart. They are aware, and I want to share with those of you who don't spend as much time thinking about learning as some of us do, is because it's our jobs, is, you know, there's a learning curve that happens. So during learning, people are adding more and more information, and their memory's growing full of all of this great stuff that they can do with ALM, right? But then they start to forget, and the forgetting curve starts as soon as the learning ends. And typically with software, we've seen this dramatic drop-off after go live. And what we can do by having spaced learning, by having these small trainings available right after the upgrade, and we'll talk about also for continuous learning in a minute, but by doing that, the forgetting doesn't happen. The learning continues, and people continue to become more and more proficient about their job. You know, and as Lydia was mentioning, the new features that are available, if they can easily learn how to use one new feature and find, like, hey, that improves what I'm able to do, then they're more apt to want to look for more new features and more new ways to be better at their job. And this is that critical point in time, this post-upgrade period, where we need to, as project directors, as you know, project sponsors, as training people, whoever, whatever role you're playing, we need to make sure we're making that available to our users so that they can be successful. Lydia, what are your thoughts?
Those are some very interesting statistics, Susan. So this is an area I would agree with you that I also have a large passion around. Because you know what, in these days, especially in the testing world, it seems that, you know, taking folks away from their daily job function for even just like 1 or 2 days is becoming too much, especially as we're seeing things around, you know, application development and testing more focused on a continuous delivery or agile movement. So taking anyone away from the norm to attend a 3 to 5 day training class for the core of the group may be okay if it's planned prior, but right after an upgrade like ALM, as things are back in motion and certain expectations of everyone is they should know this already, you kind of have to be in some way a little fearful that, you know, if the folks, did they actually retain anything from that training, or do they know where to go when they have issues or problems so that it doesn't cause any delays, not only from an education path, but also from a product release, especially when you're talking about testing. So there are a number of different options here, and I think you mentioned something a little earlier, Susan, about, you know, just from the overwhelming aspect of knowledge and information that you would get in a training class. In some cases, you just have to know where to go, where to reference, and other forms of training like art and some of the e-learning mechanisms available help that users kind of know where to reference or know where to get access to that at the time of need. And you mentioned it beautifully earlier when you're talking about those learning moments at that time of need or having to solve problems. And more often than less happen in this post-upgrade process. So just having the accessibility to some of that information that they may have learned during the prior stages of training, as well as just some of those highlighted areas or on-demand type training that they can access the answers that they need to solve, would be more than helpful. And as that organization that you mentioned, Susan, they did it right. I mean, they spent the time and effort And as it sounds, they had a lot less downtime, more productivity after and post upgrade. So I would definitely suggest that a lot of other organizations kind of follow that method too.
Yeah, and that organization was one that was open to all on demand. But I have seen other organizations who address this in a way that fits their culture. So if you're a culture of people wanting to come together to learn, of wanting the personal touch, you can still do something like this in terms of having, every day from 1 to 2, there's a lab that's available and there's a subject matter expert there, and you can come in and work on your tasks right there in that lab and get the help that you need. Again, it's focusing on a short amount of time. It's people doing their jobs. It's not learning separate from the job. It's learning as you're doing, because that's when you actually want it. So, we have a lot of great on-demand options. And I think at the end of this, we're going to get maybe more into specific things that we have that can help customers who are, organizations that are working on this upgrade planning. But I wanted to mention that it's not all online or on-demand or self-paced. There are ways for organizations that have a culture of in-person to mimic that through short lab-based, where people can bring in their daily jobs. And that's great for, the week of upgrade and the week after upgrade, to make sure those are available.
Great, ladies. This is obviously a really important discussion area, this post-upgrade training. I think that, when you have this post-upgrade training, you're really talking about reducing the internal support costs, so that you don't get 5,000 calls to the support desk, post-upgrade on the changes, especially when, again, when we're talking about having some of the views with ALM 12 being different. So it's not going to be as familiar. Obviously, when we made the changes, we're keeping it as close as we can, but it's not going to look exactly the same, especially in the web-based stuff. So let's launch out our poll results here. So again, if you recall, it was about, does your organization typically do post-upgrade training? So we have about 56% of our people saying yes, and about 31% saying no. So I think that's again pretty telling of where we're at and what our customers are doing from that post-upgrade. I'm going to move on, and we're going to move to our next key education area. And we call this the net new training or post-upgrade training. And the reason we actually break apart what we call ongoing or continuous education from the net new training. And we do that for specific reasons. The net new training is, again, we have a lot of change that's happening in organizations today. Perhaps you have contractors within the organization that come in and out to support the organization with ALM, for instance. What if you have a shift of resources? So the resources are moving off this application ALM and they're moving into another one. And then you have a new set of people. We want to actually train them differently. Again, keeping you guys engaged here. Hopefully we'll get some good results here. Let's pop up our polling question here. This one is an interesting one, I think, from me and my perspective. Again, what percentage of your ALM users are contractors? So you can see that you have a myriad of different blocks of percentages there to select from. So Lydia, I'm going to start with you. So why do you think it's different and important to have a particular plan around the net new training for somebody who's net new to ALM 12 after the upgrade?
Well, if someone's just joining a team or needs to learn ALM from the ground up, there's a number of different options to help support that resource. But, ALM is a pretty big tool. There's a lot of different modules in ALM. There's a lot of different job functions in ALM. So depending on whether or not you have just one or a couple of folks that need to get this new ramp up, or if you've got a whole entire team, some of the options that I would recommend is, if you do have a smaller amount, would be starting off by attending either a virtual hosted end user training class or a public training class at any number of HP or partner certified training facilities. And these are regularly hosted classes that are in most convenient major cities or online, where a user can be one of many different customers coming in from all types of industries or skill levels. And this is a great way of getting them out of the office and into an environment where there are other users that are also kind of going through the same process that they are. They're new to the scene, they're new to the tool, and kind of getting in some insight from some of those other students that could be, let's say, in the retail industry or in the banking industry, and getting a better understanding just kind of how the tool is used across the different markets. It's also cost effective because you're only training one person or a handful of people at one time. Now, if you've got a bigger team, then obviously something more focused on site would be a recommendation. Or if your processes internally are changing, looking at taking that on-site class and making a little bit more custom. But I definitely suggest taking those users, those new users, kind of away from the daily grind into a more concentrated, less distraction type mode so that they become familiar with the use of ALM just from the bottom up and getting all the insights, as well as they're going to have an instructor there for 3, 5 days, whatever the duration of the class is, that has this expertise. They've been using these tools for a number of years. They've seen most of the customers that have come in from different industries. They can provide a lot of real-world experience. And in most cases, I know I've been teaching for years, I still keep in touch with a number of customers and a number of students that have come into my class because the environments change. So, starting out with a less distraction, less more focused type of training would be a strong recommendation for a lot of those newer users. And there are a lot of different options.
Great. You know what, before Susan, you respond to this net new training, I'm going to have, we're going to launch our results from the poll here because what I find interesting about this is that nearly 80% of the folks on the phone have some varying level of contractors within their organization using ALM. So I think this net new training on ALM is real. I mean, again, maybe these people aren't rolling off as quickly as, it may appear, but nearly 80%. That's a lot of people who, are contractors to our customers. So Susan, your thoughts here?
Yeah, that definitely is a very important statistic because it changes the way that we think about our workforce. So, in some software areas, the people using the software are the same people who come in, every day, and they're regular employees, and you might have a little turnover, but it's not a huge factor. In the ALM space, where we have such a great number of contractors, it means we have to have a special plan in place for enabling them to be successful. You may have contractors who stay on for a long time, but you may have a very rapid turnover there, and you're paying for these folks. So the last thing that you want is for someone to come in and wait around for 3 weeks not really knowing what they're doing until you can get them, up and running. That brings to mind a number of things. One is something we haven't talked about yet, and that's certification. So HP Software has a very robust certification program, and when you're looking at contractors, looking to see if they are certified in ALM means that they're going to be coming into your organization already with an expertise level and a skill level, and we have different levels of certification so you can see what level they are. And then you're only going to have to worry about training them on how you utilize ALM within your organization and what you specifically want them to do that's unique to you. Our certifications are version specific, so you're able to see, did someone get certified in version 8, or are they certified in something that's actually relevant to you? So as you're looking at contractors, if you're not aware of certifications yet, come to our website. You can learn a lot more about the Expert One. For those of you who may be contractors, getting certified is a way to show and validate and quantify your level of expertise so that you don't just tell people that you know what you're doing. You've already proven it, and it's right there certified for you. So that's one thing to think about when we're thinking about that. But getting back to this post-upgrade training and the idea of such a large number of contractors, I think, what Lydia had to say was spot on. The classroom training is very important for people who are brand new to ALM so that they understand the breadth of the application, the capability, as well as how to work with all of the areas of it. We're also going to have situations with this kind of turnover. You're not going to be able to wait for an ILT class. You need someone to get up and running the day that they're starting. And so having self-paced learning that's available for them, and again, having that full breadth. So we have ALM self-paced training, and it has 26 modules in it. It's the largest of any of our courses. We have 25 different products that we cover with our ART tool, and ALM is the biggest, 26 modules of content. Typically, no one's going to take all of those, but someone who's brand new has that whole self-paced library, if you will, in front of them where they can take the parts that you assign to them so that they can get up and running quickly. And that's another way to address this kind of rapid turnover and new people coming in based on the contractors.
Thanks, Susan. Hey, we're getting a ton of questions coming at me, but there's one question that I want to make sure we address in the recording. And that question is this, and it can either code, I think, from a partner standpoint or an HP software education standpoint. Is there customized training available for ALM outside of the quote-unquote generic training that you offer today?
Hey, Lydia, how about you take that from a classroom standpoint, and then I'll take it from the self-paced.
Okay, not a problem. That sounds great. So there's a couple different methods to custom training. In most cases, if you attend a public or a virtual-led training, you are going to get the general training available for the product. And that, when I say general, you're not losing any content in a general class. It's really just trying to gauge when the courseware developers think about, how to develop a training class for such a variety of different customers or different technologies. It has to keep on a focused topic around the new features and functionality. But we all know that, if a customer is trying to train a big group, and it's not only about just focusing in on ALM feature functionality, but it's also, as Susan mentioned earlier, their focused processes or their, some tips and tricks around managing their application environments. There is aspects of customization. So there's some high-level customization that you can kind of bring that general content of ALM into your processes. And, typically that would take some, initial time up front with the instructor, with the product management team, or the testing teams on the customers, and to really make sure that content jives together. But then there's also I know HP has a content custom course developers, as well as we at Sky, where if you want to take the training content that HP has and make it more in tune to an organization's process from start to finish, then obviously that would take a little bit of some courseware development time up front. So Susan, I'll let you talk about the web-based aspect of customization.
Sure. So for our customers who want to have self-paced online learning available to their users, either for, pre-go live, at go live, post-upgrade, or continuous learning, one of the things that we're finding people are having great success with is what we call the Adoption Readiness Tool. And the Adoption Readiness Tool is specifically designed to address this aspect of customization. So what we do is we build the content in-house. And as Lydia was saying, for the classroom training, it's our ability to know the broad scope of how people use our applications and build all of that into the content. But then our customers can take that content and take the tool that we use to create the content, and they can then modify it. So, we've built the cake, and they're going to put the icing on the cake that matches, the way that they're doing things so that it's extremely relevant and targeted to their learners. And the content is made up both of simulation-based learning, how do I actually do something, and also contextual learning, workflows, processes, procedures. And so the customization can happen at either or both of those levels. So an organization may want to re-record what the steps look like in a process so that someone knows exactly what they're doing, in their role in the organization. Or it may be, swapping out for a different workflow because different people do different things within their unique business processes. So we certainly recommend customizing the training for your users because a lot of research shows that adult learners are going to be most motivated to learn if they feel that the content is relevant and unique to them. So definitely a great question.
Great. Thank you guys for those great answers. I'm going to move right into our last key education area. We're coming up on about 7 minutes before the end of the webinar, so thank you all for sticking with us. I think it's been some really good conversation and information being conveyed about education for ALM 12. But we're on to ongoing continuous education. I think a lot of the points on this have been discussed already. But, we coined the term of continuous education because, again, it goes back to what Susan and Lydia have said. At the end of the day, people learn in small, bite-sized chunks of training. Obviously, we can be successful in learning at a 5-day course, but, you need that reaffirmation as they go through their day-to-day job on how and what to learn next. So, Susan, just real briefly, you want to touch on the ongoing continuous education key?
Yeah, absolutely. This, as you mentioned, we have talked about a little bit, but I think it's important in a couple of different ways. One is the refresher type training. So we take, what people learned in the classroom or what they learned in their pre-upgrade and their just-in-time training, and think of that as, the structured learning, the 10% of learning. And then that grows by adding in, the learning momentum that happens as they start using the application. But then the real growth, the 70% of learning, is what's happening as they're integrating what they've learned into their experiences, into their workplace education. And that is ongoing on a daily basis. And we want to make sure that they have access to refreshers as they need them. And the other flip side of it is this net new feature function training. So as you're doing the upgrade, you may just want to get people up and running quickly and using the new application. But then a couple of weeks after, you want to send out a reminder to them that, hey, did you know we can do X, Y, and Z in ALM 12 that wasn't an option in ALM 11.5? And here's a link to a simulation on how you can take advantage of that feature. So you're able to introduce new things to them as they either become available from HP for your users, or you decide that you want to start using those in your business. And that's a way to continue growing the skills and the excitement and keeping people engaged and aware of the fact that they have the ability to continuously learn. And this is also where we get into, keeping away from knowledge decay. We don't want people to start to fall off that cliff just a few weeks or months after they've gone through their more intensive learning experience.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. And Lydia, I personally could go on and on and on and on about education, specifically around ALM, since that's sort of my background as well. But we do need to start closing out. So if you could flip the screen to the next Learn More. What I want to convey to those of you who are in attendance here is, we obviously have our expert's point of view. You can go visit our websites. We have an ALM-specific website about, again, the new features and functions within the ALM 12. We have our HP ART, or Adoption Readiness Tool, that Susan talked about in that customizable sort of web-based training. And then we have our website around software education. The bonus for you on the line here is that you can actually download the free trial of ALM Adoption Readiness Tool at that website for HP Art. Go check it out. You'll see the simulations. You'll see the job aids. You'll see how to launch the module of the training. Super awesome content that we start with, and then again you can build on that and actually customize that specific to your organization and your own internal processes. Again, I'd be remiss not to tell you that, again, if you're looking for more guidance around that ALM upgrade from an implementation service or upgrade service, somebody who's actually done this time and time again, feel free to reach out to our HP Software Professional Services or our partner here at Sky IT Group. We've got a lot of upgrades since the version 12 came out, and we'd be happy to work with you and your organization as we go through. The last slide I have here is, I have been asked some questions. What education classes do you have? So I put them here. Again, you guys will get these slides. They'll have the links. You can see we have an ALM 12 Essentials class, a Delta class, again, helpful for those people who already know ALM 12, just show me the difference. And then we have the ART-based, or the Adoption Readiness training tool that you have here as well. So Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you to finish things out and close out the webinar.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tina, and thank you to Lydia and Susan. This was awesome. I can tell you from my personal perspective, we're in this very process right now trying to plan for the upgrade, and we're kicking around different ideas on how to get the users trained. So this was extremely timely and beneficial for us, and I'm sure for the other folks on the call as well. So thank you guys very much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. If you could just go to the next slide. Just a couple things to mention, folks, as we wrap things up. First of all, we're running another virtual summit. Vivit did these last year. They were pretty successful. We have one coming up on mobility. Some of the top experts and HP fellows will be joining us to discuss the HP mobility offerings. So if you haven't already done so, definitely register for that. It's coming up next week. Also, for those of you that are planning to go to HP Discover in Barcelona, if you want to go ahead and use the link provided in these slides, which again will be made available after the webinar. This will let HP know that you're a Vivit member and hook you all in that way. Next slide. There's also, in case you weren't already aware and participating, definitely check out online the HP IT Experts community and consider participating in the online expert days. They run those pretty regularly, those online expert days. I know there's definitely some on ALM. I've been involved in those myself, so they're quite helpful as well. One more slide, I think, Tina. And then, yeah, definitely at the end of the webinar, go ahead and consider completing the survey and opt in to learn more from HP. And as I stated earlier, the webinar recording and the presentation materials and any questions that we couldn't address that came in, those will be answered offline, and the answers posted as well on the Vivit website. You'll be notified when that time comes that that content is available. So once again, thank you to Lydia, Susan, Tina, the rest of the folks helping us run this webinar. Thanks to all of you for attending. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Take care.